As we sit here today, kind of describe to me how you're feeling about the way school districts are looking to start the fall. Remind me again what's happening in Greater Albany Public Schools and just kind of the effects it's having on the transportation aspect of everything.
Sure. So I think for all school districts and certainly in Greater Albany, we're trying to set up plans that allow us to be flexible depending on what direction this virus ends up taking. And so we've tried to set paths in place so that if it gets worse, we can adjust. And as it gets better, we can adjust with, I think, the common goal everybody has of getting back as close to normal as we're safely able.
Mhm.
And so in Albany, that means we've kind of developed three lanes that families can choose from based on their comfort level. There's a hybrid model where students have a mixed schedule depending on what grade they're in. There is a interactive model at home where they can run in parallel with their friends in their classroom, but that student is choosing to stay at home all of the time. And then there is an Albany online school, which is a more traditional online schooling alternative for families that want to have more of a self-paced instruction.
Now,
And then within that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
is that from the get-go, like once the school year starts, the three options, or are you starting everything virtual to begin with?
We will start everything virtual to begin with. That's actually where I was going next, is the families choose which one of those lanes that they want to be in, or at least that they want to start in. And then based on what the conditions are with the virus and the metrics that the state has, we may or may not be able to have the in-person portion of that instruction. And so for Albany, at least until October 19th, we've decided that we can't safely have that in-person instruction. So we're going to begin the year all virtually and revisit that on October 19th as we get updated metrics.
In a normal school year with no sort of pandemic, tell me what goes into planning for the transportation of kids to and from school. I know that it's not just like a light switch and, you drive the buses and pick them up. There's so much that goes into it in a normal year.
There is, and it's everything from getting the bell times that the schools set up to support getting all of the kids to school with a limited number of buses, through to designing the specific routes that the buses are going to take in order to get those kids picked up on time and get them delivered to schools across the entire district. Getting those routes built, recruiting and training the drivers that are going to drive those routes, and then getting drivers assigned to each one of those routes and getting them ready to start the school year as they come in off of summer vacation. It's even in a normal year, this is a busy time of year for us.
And when you add in the coronavirus pandemic, how much more work has that put on your plate?
So I think the easiest way to think of it is, kind of each of those lanes kind of changes the kind of plans you have to have. So you have to have a plan to take all of the kids to school like you would in a normal year. You have to have a plan to support different groups of kids in the cohorting model that we have for the hybrid. And you also have to have a plan for, as we're doing for the start of this school year, to be shut down completely and how you're going to continue to employ people. So it sort of triples the amount of planning that you have to do. It also complicates our driver recruiting and training efforts.
How has that impacted your ability to hire and keep these bus drivers?
So on the retention side, transportation, it's a high turnover industry to begin with. Albany struggles to have enough bus drivers in a normal year. Oregon struggles to have enough bus drivers in a normal year. And the United States struggles to have enough school bus drivers in a normal year. So when you add COVID on top of that, school bus drivers tend to skew older. About a third of our drivers are over 65. And so that significantly complicates the retention side of school bus drivers. On the training side, the big challenge you have is obviously there's a front end piece that has to be done with the Department of Motor Vehicles. Department of Motor Vehicles has to have the same social distancing requirements everyone else does. So it slows down their ability to complete that initial training. And then it makes getting them linked up with trainers to do the in-person piece that we handle at the school district more difficult as well. So you have people leaving faster and coming in slower, and that creates a challenge for us.
Are you really able to really fully train anyone right now because of the restrictions?
Slowly, but we can. They have to go through all of the same training that they would in any normal year. It involves written tests at DMV. It involves in-person training with us, and then it involves testing with us. But we are able to do that on the buses with the use of masks and shields and distancing. We are able to complete that. It just takes a lot more time.
About how many school bus drivers do you have on staff at GAPS?
Right now, we've got 81 commercial drivers license holding school bus drivers.
And how does that number compare to, say, right before the pandemic hit last spring. You mentioned you have more bus drivers leaving than you do coming in. I'm not sure if you were speaking specific about your district or just kind of generically.
So about this time of year, the way we keep track of that is we keep track of the number of open routes we have, which are routes that don't have a regularly assigned driver. And we compare that with the number of new drivers that we have coming in who are getting ready to get their first route. I don't remember the exact numbers last time, but roughly speaking, we had our routes covered at this time of year. And I think we had a couple of folks that were coming in waiting to pick up a route. So we were actually started last year in fairly healthy shape. This year, right now, we have 10 open routes and we have 3 drivers that are coming in to claim their first route if everything goes according to plan. Now, having said that, we also have, we still have ongoing work with our staff to identify people who have underlying health conditions who won't be able to return. And that's still an ongoing process. So that 10 routes that we're talking about is probably our best case scenario.
What's the worst case scenario?
I won't know that for a couple of weeks until we've actually had a chance to talk with each one of our staff members and verify who's coming back. That process starts in earnest on Monday. We have a back to school meeting normally 2 weeks before Labor Day, and we're going to try to have that meeting virtually where we'll actually see who shows up in the meeting and who's able to come back. We've been doing outreach over the summer. I think we're close. I don't think that number is going to change wildly, but there are going to be a couple of people who, after we walk through what the requirements are for the school year, they're going to realize that what they thought they could do, they may not ultimately be able to do for us.
I spoke to a regional economist for the state's employment department, and he said for the transportation sector of the school districts across the state that it's grown slowly over the years. And because of that, obviously, there were more bus drivers before this pandemic that standed to lose their job. Where do the job statuses of your bus drivers stand? I feel like I remember you saying you're doing your best to keep them all on, even if there are no routes for them to run.
Right. So I think even in our all hybrid model, we probably won't end up in a situation where there are literally no routes to run because there's still going to be things like delivering school supplies, delivering health supplies, delivering food to families. And there's a handful of special cases of students who have placements that are outside the school district that we provide transportation. So we'll have a significantly reduced number, but it won't be zero. Beyond that, we realized that as soon as the metrics support bringing kids back to school, we need to have our bus drivers ready to go. And if we just flat out laid them off, they wouldn't be able to do that for us. The second thing that we have that's going on here is, aside from transportation, those staffing challenges that I mentioned, those apply district wide. And so with COVID, you've increased the amount of work that has to be done in the schools in terms of cleaning and the food service support, while simultaneously reducing the staff that's available to perform those tasks because of people who are older or who have underlying conditions. So our expectation is to pay drivers as if they were driving and to reemploy them in other roles in the district.
Have you guys started looking at what modifications you might have to make to the buses themselves when students, if they do end up returning, to make them safer for the kids and for the bus drivers?
So in the state of Oregon, what you can actually physically change on a school bus is fairly limited, and for good reason. A lot of the things that you might think you would want to do for COVID are ultimately not as effective as they seem at first blush, or they create a different kind of safety concern in the event of an accident. So there's not a lot of physical modifications that happen in the bus. What we do instead is we modify how we load the bus, how we screen. And so our plan for the return to the school year, we will screen drivers as they come in the morning. There's a questionnaire that they'll go through, and we'll check and verify that they're healthy to drive that day. As they are driving their routes, at each stop, they will screen the students that come on board to visually make sure they're not exhibiting obvious signs of coronavirus. And as they seat them on the bus, to the extent we can, we will keep the kids separated on the bus and separated from the driver. And if we have a situation where a student is ill but still has to get onto the bus, then we will keep that student also isolated. All of the K-12 students are going to be required to wear masks when they are on the bus, masks and or face shields. And the drivers will do that when they're not actively operating the bus. So it's not so much a modification of the vehicle as it is a modification of people's behavior on the bus.
Now, is that a set of statewide requirements as far as wearing the masks and stuff on the bus, or is that something specific that your district has decided?
So the guidance that all of the school districts are working on comes from the states, and it's the Ready Schools Safe Learners guidance that you can Google, and it'll come up if you want to read through it. And there's a section in there on transportation, and that section does require K-12 students to wear masks when they are on the bus. When you read that document, you'll notice there's a set of requirements, and then there is a set of recommendations. The requirements are fairly easy for school districts to meet. It's essentially clean the bus between runs and wear masks on the bus. The recommendations are keep students 6 feet away from the driver, keep students 3 feet from one another, things along that. Those get much harder to meet. The hybrid model that we have will reduce the number of students that we have on each bus, but we don't know what families will choose and how low that number of bus riders will actually get.
Have families been able to start making those choices of which lane they want to go in?
Families have started to, through our registration process, indicate which lanes they want to go in. I don't have the up-to-the-minute numbers on the registrations. I can tell you that for families have had a pretty low indication of being interested in immediately returning to the school bus for reasons that I think are pretty obvious. I anticipate that we'll probably start the year with fairly low ridership, and then the ridership will continue to climb as people get more comfortable and more acclimated to how the system is working.
So what is the organization, because I forgot that you're a part of as well for transportation?
Oh, the Oregon Pupil Transportation Association.
Yes. Okay. So tell me about what that organization exactly is, and what's the feedback you're getting? What are you hearing among other transportation officials and bus drivers around the state?
So that's the professional organization for transportation professionals in the school transportation industry in Oregon. And it's built around professional development, idea sharing, and best practices. This year we've had a kind of a valley-wide meeting about every week on Tuesdays. We get together and we kind of share ideas. I think if you were going to generalize, obviously I can't speak for every school district that was in that meeting, but generally, I think it's fair to say school districts are trying to provide options to families. They're trying to provide ways to safely transport kids to school, and they're landing on similar solutions. Obviously, each community has different attitudes, different constraints, different requirements, but I think the philosophies are common across the board, and obviously the guidance from the state is common across the board.
So how difficult is it with such a fluid situation? You had mentioned earlier about how COVID has made it tough to hire and retain drivers. But as we get down to the wire to the start of the school year, and for at least, about a month, you're going to be all virtual. What does that look like for your bus drivers? Do they just call in every day and see if they're required to come in, and then how tough is that? I guess what I'm trying to get at is, are you seeing any of your drivers in your district or around the state jumping ship and saying I can't take it day by day. I've got to know, farther in advance what my work week's going to look like.
Well, one of the nice things about the pupil transportation industry, and I think I can speak across the board on this one, is that everybody understands the necessity of being flexible and supporting the kids. And so that is common before COVID, that's common during COVID, and it'll be common again after. So drivers understand that there's always uncertainty in terms of their route, in terms of the students that they're going to drive on any given day, because students' needs change. I think financially, they have some concerns about making sure that they can, live their lives, pay their bills just like anybody else. But they understand that this has to be flexible because that's what kids need right now. I have not seen drivers trying to leave the industry unless we are pushing them out. And every time I run into one of my drivers, or I see them at the office, or I see them even out in town, the first thing is, when can I get back? When can I start driving the kids? Because they really are excited about getting back to school and getting kids to school again.
And what has their reaction been when you say we just don't know yet?
Well, you get because everybody wants to know. I have that same reaction. I suspect you do too. And then the nod of, I understand that that's not an answerable question yet, and we're working towards it.
So I just thought of another question. I don't know if you could speak specifically about it to your district, but as far as special needs children go, I know that there are also school buses out there that are specifically made to help transport these students with special needs. do you guys have any of those buses yourselves? How many of them? And then also, how specific to that has it made? Has this pandemic made that more difficult? Because you obviously have to be more hands-on to help load kids in wheelchairs onto these buses and get them off and things like that.
So we have in Albany, we have 39 what we call general education routes, the big buses, and we have 20 special needs routes that we run in a typical year. And we expect that to stay kind of steady. Special needs students will start in the kind of cohorted model that I described based on their grade level. But then there will be adjustments made for special needs students because they have specific needs, and also because in some cases they need supports from a specific professional that may be available on a different schedule than their normal cohort. So we have the plan to reduce the number of kids on the bus by spreading them out across the week, similar to what we have in other cases. We also may simply have to just make more runs with the buses, add special needs routes to accommodate those children. Right now, we're still working through the scheduling of the kids in the academic environment, and then we will wrap the transportation plan around those students' needs as we've identified them.
I had a school bus driver reach out to me. I can't remember which district they were in, but they were a special needs school bus driver, and they talked about how this pandemic has also, well, I actually don't know what kind of bus driver they were, but her point was that with the safety measures that are going to have to be put in place as far as keeping kids farther from the bus driver, wearing masks, things like that, the bus drivers who, those really good bus drivers out there have unique relationships with the students they drive. And often they